basic NLP for professionals, and what that means is neuro-linguistic programming. Simple way to think about that is reprogramming your nervous system through the use of language. Okay? So, what is NLP? NLP was created by Richard Bandler and John Grinder in the Santa Cruz Mountains in 1976. Now, Richard Bandler was a mathematician. He studied formulas. He was actually the teaching assistant for John Grinder, who was a linguist, and he studied the structure of language. So the two of them got together and thought to themselves, wouldn't it be wild if we could find a way to model what people who are really effective with communication do and reproduce that model and teach it to other people? So they studied 3 people in particular, and they modeled them, and we'll get into what modeling is down the road. They studied Fritz Perls, who was a Gestalt therapist, Virginia Satir, who was a family therapist, and Milton Erickson, who was a hypnotherapist, and therein lies the connection between NLP and hypnosis, one of the many that we'll come to find out. Now, there's 2 ways that you can think about neurolinguistic programming. The first way is a set of modeling tools that you can use to observe, model, and reproduce excellence in any field. And the second way is a set of processes that have been archived over the years as a result of that modeling process. So down the road we'll be talking about different processes such as the visual swish or the auditory swish or the 6-step reframe or a conflict integration. There's also a belief change process. Now, what is it good for? This is an important reason to get you fired up about learning neurolinguistic programming. NLP is good for your ability to manage your internal state, how you feel inside. It's great for helping you to stay resourceful during normally stressful times. These could be personal, professional, and what have you. And it gives you a high degree of behavioral flexibility in difficult situations. Notice most of the time as we get increasingly stressed with a situation, our bandwidth shrinks and our ability to be eloquent and have different ways of handling the problem, different ways of communicating gets narrow and narrower and narrower as time goes on. So it helps you keep that high degree of behavioral flexibility so that you have more choice, essentially. It's also, NLP can really increase the speed with which you learn dramatically. That's one of the very popular applications of NLP, and I'm going to talk about a very famous example of that in just a moment. It also helps you to become a more influential member of your team. Now, your team could be your family. It could be your group of friends. It could be your mastermind group. It could be your networking group. It could be your professional circle. It could be other colleagues that you interact with. Any group that you are a part of. And it's a tool that you can use to model and reproduce excellence in any field. So one of the kind of landmark modeling cases that was done in the early days of NLP was with Anthony Robbins and Richard Bandler. They got hired by the US government to model the sharpshooting program. And at the time, it took approximately 4 weeks to do the training with about a 20% pass rate. And I'm not exactly sure on the exact numbers, but it was approximately that. What they did was they asked for the top 5 sharpshooters, and they modeled, using NLP, what the top 5 sharpshooters did differently than everyone else. Not just in terms of what they did differently with their body, but what they were seeing, what they were hearing, what they were feeling, what they were picturing in their mind, how they talked to themselves, the emotional state that they were in. And they were able to take that program and shrink it down to about a quarter of the time, about 7 days, with more than an 80% pass rate. That is dramatic. And so NLP is great for identifying the key elements in a system or in a process that really make the difference quickly, figuring out what that is, modeling it, testing it, and then reproducing it. And you can actually use NLP to model not just something that someone does well, some example of excellence, but you can use it to model what some people would consider a pathology. And one way to think of a pathology like a panic attack is it's actually a really useful strategy. And if you take that same strategy that's used to produce a panic attack and put different content in there that isn't scary, you can actually use it to create intense motivation for something. I mean, think about it for a moment. Someone who has a panic attack, when they come into my office and talk about, I have this panic attack that's happening, I'm doing a skill assessment. I don't look at them like there's something wrong with them. I'm doing a skill assessment. I'm thinking about what skills must this person possess in order to produce this response. And when we get into presuppositions, we'll talk about this a little bit more. But realize, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most neuro-linguistic programmers, for you to have something like a panic attack or stress, it requires certain skills. I don't know anyone who can have a panic attack without a very strong internal dialogue and without the ability to make very vivid, compelling images in their mind and have a strong emotional reaction to it. So those are great skills, and if we put good content in there, you might be surprised what you can actually do with it. So, this is the most complicated diagram I will ever show you. If you get this, it is all downhill from here. So, this is what we call the basic NLP map, how we process information. So, here we have the world. This is reality. This is what's actually going on outside of your mind. And scientists estimate there's about 2 million bits of information we can possibly absorb at any one second. In NLP, we call this the territory. This is what's actually going on outside of our minds. This is why two people will see the same event and have a totally different response. This is the territory. This is what's going on outside of us. Now, out of that 2 million, the same scientists estimate, and I don't know who comes up with these numbers, that there's about 134,000 of those 2 million bits that we can actually absorb from any one second. And we, in our minds, create this collage, or you could also call it a map of what's going on outside. Now, how do we take data into our minds to construct this? Well, we take in pictures, we take in sounds, smells, tastes, touch, and sensation. That's how we take data in, and we create a map of what's going on outside the territory. Now, as you can see, there's 2 million available to us. We're only absorbing about 134,000. So how do we go from 2 million down to 134,000? Well, we delete tons of information. We distort tons of information, and we generalize tons of information. All men are this. All women are that. All salesmen are this. All business professionals are that. We make lots of generalizations. We delete tons of information, and one of the things we'll get into down the road is how we determine what to delete and what not. And what you'll find is that based on your own unique personality, certain things will be relevant to you or will feel relevant to you, and certain things won't. And as a result of that, you will miss huge chunks of information that you would have gotten otherwise. Huge chunks of information that someone else might immediately notice right off the bat, but you won't. So, what we do is we make this map, this limited, skewed, distorted, tiny, tiny version of what's going on out here, and then we got to figure out what to do with it. Right now, it's just data in our minds. It's just data. That's why I like to use the example. I'm going to give you a very limited set of data, and what I would like you and the audience to do is fill in the blanks. Make up the story. You're the author. You're the director of this. It can be anything you want. There is no wrong answer. So there's two people, person A and person B. Person A runs up to person B and hits them. That's all I'm going to give you. Now, I'm not going to tell you if it's a man, if it's a woman, if it's an adult, a child, an alien, or a Sasquatch. You make it up. You make up the story in your mind right now, and notice what's the first story that comes to mind. Okay? Now, whatever story you came up with, realize there's a way you got to that. And here's what happens. We make this map or this collage in our mind with the pictures, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the touches that we feel are relevant to us and relevant to our experience right now. And then we compare it. We compare that collage, or in NLP we call it an internal representation. We're internally representing the information to ourselves. And we're comparing that to other collages from the past or other internal representations from the past that we have stored in our mind. And realize what you have in your library, Mark, might be very different than what you have in your library, Bob, in your mind. We all have a different library of things that are important and are relevant to us, again, according to our personality. And so what we essentially do is we make up a map and then we go, is it like this? No. Is it like this? No. Is it like this? Yes, that's exactly what it's like. Once we find a comparison that matches, then and only then we can determine what it actually means, what we are going to make it mean. This means blank. Okay? Now, until we define what something really means, we have no idea how we are going to feel about it and how we're ultimately going to act as a response. Now, something that's worth mentioning is realize this. Your physical state, so think about times when you're really stressed versus times when you're really relaxed, can also affect the meaning that you make from moment to moment. Okay? And so if you're in a very challenged emotional state, whether it's emotional or whether it's physical from sickness or emotional from stress or what have you, that can also alter how we make the meaning. So this is a little bit interactive here, but for simplicity, realize until we make that comparison, we don't know what it means. And so it's all about the story that we write in our minds, what we make something mean. Now, it's important to also mention here that when we talk about the meaning, there's a big difference between a physical sensation in your body and what you make that physical sensation mean. Most people are very afraid of having certain feelings and they'll do anything they can to avoid it. But here's something to consider. The actual physical sensation of terror and excitement are identical. They're about the same. The heart rate gets elevated, the blood pressure goes up, sometimes the palms can get a little sweaty. Another way to look at it is the physical sensation of driving your car off a cliff to your fiery death is going to feel the same. That dropping feeling, that gravitational pull, is going to be the same as going down the first hill of your favorite roller coaster. Only one's energizing and euphoric and exciting, and one, should you survive it, would probably wreck your adrenal glands, make you stressed out, maybe make your hair fall out. Okay? The butterflies you get when you're getting ready to get into your first schoolyard fight or confrontation is identical to the butterflies you might get from asking out someone for the first time or asking someone to dance. And so the reason I mention that is that the physical sensations going on in your body in and of themselves are never anything to actually be afraid of. What makes them scary is the meaning we make about it. Okay? When a person starts to have a panic attack, it's not the fact that their blood pressure has gone up a little bit or that their heart rate has gone up a little bit that's a problem. It's certainly not the fact that their palms might get a little sweaty as the problem. The problem is what they tell themselves that means in their mind, what they think this could lead to. Oh my God, this means I'm going to black out behind the wheel and wreck the car or what have you. It's the story they tell themselves. So it's always going to come back to the story. Now, if you've ever wondered why your phone number has a dash every couple of digits and your social security number, it's because essentially we have the attention span of a gnat. Okay? And that's fine. That's a good thing. We can use that to our advantage, right? But we can only track 7 plus or minus 2 things at one time. Now realize that out of 2 million we could possibly absorb, we can only actually pay attention to and track maybe 7 at a time, roughly speaking. And so imagine if you go to Google and you're looking for how bad things happen to good people, you would instantly get about 500 million responses in probably a half a second. If you then Googled the exact opposite, how good things happen to good people, you would get actually even more examples of how that's possible in about a half a second. In this day and age, I'm sure you could imagine with Google, you could find evidence to support almost anything that you choose to believe, okay, no matter what it is. So, since we can only pay attention to a very small amount of information at one time, and with such a vast amount of information available to us at our fingertips, more readily available than ever before, it's logical to assume that whatever we are looking for, we will find. And that's exactly what happens. So realize this. Think of your brain as like a stereo receiver. Now, right now, around us, there's jazz, there's hip-hop, there's classical, there's conservative radio, there's liberal talk radio. And there's all these different channels available to us, but we can only tune into one at a time, and whichever one we tune into that channel to the exclusion of everything else. So if we tune in the country, it's all going to be about dead dogs, broken down trucks, and getting drunk, right? Which means we're going to miss everything else. But if we turn in that R&B on that Friday night with the candlelight, right, it's going to be a whole different vibe. Okay? And this is what we do. And you do this, whether you're conscious of it or not, on a daily basis. To give you a realistic example of how we're walking around with this filter that we're looking for, when my wife, Stephanie, became pregnant with our first son, Dashiell, the next morning, all I was thinking about was going to work and getting my cup of coffee on the way to work like I normally did. So I'm driving down the road, heading to Starbucks, and sure enough, as I'm driving, I see a pregnant woman on the side of the road, and I'm like, that's weird. She's pregnant, my wife's pregnant, coincidence, keep driving. All of a sudden, a minivan pulls in front of me with a sign that says baby on board. I'm like, wow, that's wild. I wonder if I'll own a minivan one day, which I do. They're actually much better than I thought they were going to be, right? But I keep driving. Then I see a guy with a jog stroller. I'm like, oh, jog stroller, maybe I'll get one of those. I go to the Starbucks that I'd gone to every day for 5 years. And on that day as I was leaving, I realized for the very first time, there was a daycare center right next door. I'd never seen it before. It had been there the whole time. Suddenly, the fact that I could never get parking between 7:30 and 8 made sense because I saw the sign that said drop-off between 7:30 and 8. Suddenly, the fact that I could never get parking and there's all those minivans in the parking lot made sense. Suddenly, the fact that I could always hear kids yelling and screaming and playing made sense. And suddenly, it all registered, but I'd never seen it before because I just wasn't tuned into kids. Now, as I'm driving to work that day, I saw a children's hospital, a playground, a school, and a Kids R Us that I'd never seen before. And they also had been there the whole time. So whatever we're tuned into, that's what we get and that's what we find to the exclusion of everything else. And so the question is, how do we determine what to delete, distort, and generalize? And it's your personality profile that determines what's important. So for example, if someone is more security-based, they are thinking about, when presented with a new experience, is this safe or is it not safe? Safe, not safe, safe, not safe. Okay? But if they're more freedom-oriented and they tend to think in terms of options or limitations, they're not thinking safety at all. When presented with a new opportunity, they're thinking, will this give me more options or is this going to limit me in some way? If someone's more what we call belonging, they're going to be thinking, well, this experience will help me to feel more included, more a part of a team, or is it going to help me feel more excluded or potentially rejected? If they're what we call competency-based, then the first thought that they're going to have is, will this new experience help to elevate me to another level, accomplish something, get further along, or is it going to, cause me to feel like I'm wasting my time, or to feel rejected or disrespected or stupid in any kind of way, because these people are chasing validation and feeling smart and feeling accomplished. And if the person's self-expressive, their first response to that new experience is this unique and special? Is this going to help me feel more unique and special and elevate me in that way? Or is it just going to make me into just another one of the Joneses, in which case they're not interested? It's your personality profile that determines what you store in your library to use as comparison. And it's your personality profile that ultimately determines the meaning. So a great example of this is, I remember being about 8 years old, and I knew that about a mile down the road from the daycare center was a huge rope swing over a massive ravine. And I knew the owner wasn't going to be home that day. Now I realized I'd already asked him to let me do this rope swing, and he said no because it was too dangerous. So we snuck out of daycare that day, and I had to go down there because all I could think about in my mind, being freedom, was swinging on that rope like Tarzan, one arm, beating my chest, like the man of the jungle. And that's all I could think about. Now my friends, when we got there, they looked at how high it was over such a big ravine, and they kind of froze up with fear a little bit. But I grabbed that rope and I swung out, and it never even occurred to me that I could get hurt until I fell and broke my arm in 2 places. It never crossed my mind. A few years later, I got invited to my first church ski trip, and I got there, I got my boots, I got my skis, I got on the lift, I went up the tallest lift I could find. I figured the higher the lift, the longer the ride. That makes sense, right? And all I could think about prior to this trip was how great it was going to feel to rush down the hill with the wind in my hair and to feel the skis cutting in the snow. And as I'm flying down next to my buddy, I look over at him, I say, hey, How do you stop? And he looked over at me like, are you serious? And I ended up back in the hospital a few minutes later because it never even occurred to me or crossed my mind that my safety could be a concern. That's the difference between what you're sorting for, what you're paying attention to, and what you're not. Okay? And see, the reality is we never want to believe we're going to miss something totally obvious, which is why we're going to show you the awareness test here in a minute. We don't want to believe it. If I told you what was going to happen, you would not believe that you would miss something so incredibly obvious. But what happens is we all do. We all do. Why? Because we're all on an agenda. We're all on a self-prophesizing agenda all of the time. And it's not a bad thing at all. Your own unique differences are just like different wildflowers. Thank God we have some variety. It makes the landscape more beautiful. But when you can identify that, we call it thought pattern identification, when you can step back and see that pattern of behavior and how that works like a current to pull you in one direction or another, now you have more choice as to what to do with it. So begin to ask yourself, what's the real takeaway of this whole map here? If we don't respond to our own internal, distorted, skewed, made-up version of reality, right? And if it's all dependent upon how we put together that collage or that map, what we compare it to, and the meaning we ultimately author about it, what does that really mean? What is the big takeaway? And here it is. The big takeaway is we respond to our map of reality, not reality itself, which means all meaning is subjective. It truly is fiction. It is open to interpretation. And what does that mean? What's the big takeaway there? If you don't like the way you feel about something, you can actually change it. And that's what we're here to learn this weekend as you start to learn this amazing technology of neuro-linguistic programming. Is just because you may have for years and years and years, every time you went through one experience, you saw it a certain way and you felt a certain way about it. And you had that happen maybe one time, or maybe 2 times, or maybe 3 times. For some of you, it may have been 5 times or 10 times. This is what we call a reality strategy. But after a period of time, you just decided, whether you're aware of it or not, that's just the way it is, right? Some of us believe that, we really enjoy working out, and some of us believe we don't. Some people believe I'm really great public speaking. Other people believe they're not. Some people believe they're social people. They like going to parties. Other people believe they're not. And I'm not saying that it's going to be incredibly easy to change, but it can be changed. That's the first piece you want to get. It can be changed. And using a technology like neuro-linguistic programming can help you change that more effectively, more quickly, and more rapidly than any other technology I've ever found. I'm often asked by clients, how did you get into this? How did you get interested in neuro-linguistic programming? And it's real simple. When I was 18 years old, and it was a very challenging time of my life, I found a book, as many people have, by Anthony Robbins called Unlimited Power, and another book called Awaken the Giant Within. I read those books, and it opened my mind. It made me begin to question what was possible. It made me begin to question the assumptions I had made, not only about myself and my life, but about others as well. And then, because I started to identify certain patterns of thinking that were happening over and over again, that allowed me to step back and consider looking at it another way, getting another perspective, enriching my map, as we say in NLP. Because when we enrich our map, when we change our map, we ultimately change our experience. And that's exactly what we did. I remember being told by several doctors that because I have flat feet on both my instep and across the arch of my foot, that I would never be able to run. And every time I tried to run until that point, it hurt. When I would go and try to get shoes to help me run more easily, the shoes would hurt. They were like casts, these like orthopedic shoes they'd put on me. But after I learned NLP, I went to the college library and I got videos of Olympians running, long distance runners running, marathon runners running. I figured they might know more than the average bear about running. And I watched video after video after video. I watched animals running. And I studied it. And I started thinking, well, what, if anything was possible, maybe there's a different way to go about it. And by using some basic tools of neuro-linguistic programming, what I found out was not only could I run, and I'm not that fast, but I could run like Forrest Gump. I've run several marathons now. And it's enjoyable and it's fun, and I've never had a running injury. And I was able to overcome that. And so this is an opportunity to really inspire yourself and question all those things that you decided maybe years ago that you can't do, you shouldn't try, it's going to be too hard, or it just doesn't naturally come to you. What if you started to reconsider the validity of that? Whether or not that's really true or not. And what if using a technology like this, you discovered that maybe there was another way? Maybe there was another way to learn. Maybe there was another way to acquire that skill. Then you can begin to imagine it could make the entire world your oyster. And this is a very common thing that I've seen over the years when teaching NLP to people, is that you go from like this very limited set of what you think is possible and what you think you can do in the world, to suddenly your new problem is, my God, I got to choose something because I believe that I could be capable and competent at accomplishing all these different things that interest me. And so now the new challenge is picking one and staying focused and following that until you get that mastery. So this is the basic NLP map, and I encourage you to study it, to learn it, to consider the deep implications of what it means for you in your life. Okay? And what I really hope it does is it really installs the belief in your mind today that just because I feel a certain way about something doesn't mean it's true. So what if all those little stories I told myself over the years about what I can and can't do weren't true? What would that mean to you now? What would you do?